Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and D podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea in our first episode of 2024. We've had some videos go up. We kind of used January for at least the first half of January to cap off list season, where we talked about lots of our favorite and occasionally least favorite things of 2023. Morgan actually put up his best games of 2023 video. We've been making an effort to talk about more types of media on the channel, so please do go check that out. It's a terrific video. If we've taken about a month off, and now we are ready to get back into the swing of things. 2024 is coming at us pretty fast and hard, considering we've actually had in like quarter one so far, we actually have had a fair amount of new music already, like making up for the fact that quarter one of 2023 was a bit barren there for a while. So woo,
Yeah,
let's go.
yeah, we're going to talk about some new music today. We're going to be talking about some new albums. There are albums that have released at time of recording that I'm quite excited for us to talk about. As an amazing new album from Glass Beach that just blew me away. Yesterday when I listened to it, there's a new album from Green Day. We have some history with them as well. Lots of records
Yeah.
on the slate this week. We've got an upcoming record from The Smile coming out, which we're very excited for. So we'll be talking about those records and more very soon. But before we get into any discussion of specific music today, I want to take a moment to acknowledge uh, a pretty tragic downfall that's happened this month. It's come kind of out of nowhere and left the music, media, music journalism, even just music listening community in a pretty strong state of shock, which is the fact that Pitchfork has been, in the words of Anna Wintour, evolved into GQ.
Just take a moment here aside from everything. Fuck Anna Wintour.
Yeah, I mean, fuck the, dissolution of music media that has a specific voice and that empowers and promotes specific voices in general, because we're seeing more and more of it as well. There's something that felt particularly upsetting and tragic about it happening to Pitchfork, though, given that Pitchfork has for a quarter of a century, uh, at the least, been kind of the central hub of discussion around indie music, around basically any form of music outside of the mainstream. Not that Pitchfork has necessarily covered everything, but that they have been a kind of fulcrum point around which alternative music and indie music culture has thrived and come to be a, important part of broader culture in the last 20 to 25 years, especially. I grew up reading Pitchfork as a teenager. I was deeply influenced by the collective voice of Pitchfork as well, the taste of Pitchfork. It was a gateway into music more broadly, especially their lists of, the greatest albums of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I would just inhale those as a kid, as well as tuning in for the daily reviews, and they had a lot of great features. Obviously, Pitchfork was sold to Condé Nast in 2015. So the fact that Condé Nast have chosen to sublimate Pitchfork into one of their other, publications is not necessarily the most um, unpredictable thing in the world, but given the prominence that I feel like Pitchfork has continued to have in media discussion, fairly regularly and with a good sort of steady pace over the last few years, it does feel a little bit unexpected. You would think that that publication would have been doing well enough to have continued sustaining itself. And, I can only speculate on, the levels of corporate greed that are happening behind the scenes, the unfair and insane standards, of clicks and engagement that, these publications are held to. But, aside from all of that bureaucratic shit, what I really want to do is just pay tribute to the site and to its extremely talented and multifaceted and diverse journalistic staff who, one of the things that Pitchfork has always caught flack for a very long time, and I think kind of unfairly in recent years because they've spent at least the last decade very consciously working to evolve past that, is the fact that they started out as a kind of, as a very small blog run by a bunch of nerdy guys in the late 90s and early 2000s, and it was a you know it was a voice for indie music, but it was a very obviously homogenized voice with a very kind of idiosyncratic style. And it still is a pastime for a lot of people to, whether they have full context or not, or whether they understand the way that Pitchfork has changed over the decades, to kind of point to the early 2000s reviews, some of the more sensational stuff, some of the more egregious stuff, some of the more, amusing stuff, and kind of point and laugh at it. But really, that stuff, to me, there's something endearing and sweet about the fact that, you know, music journalism could be that personalized and that silly and that idiosyncratic in the blog era. Like, we can look at those reviews now and like, these are so stupid and these are so dumb, but in the face of what, not all, but a good chunk of music journalism and media looks like now, sometimes be hard to find that level of personality. But anyway, that aside, Pitchfork from the late 2000s and really into the 2010s as well worked to diversify and to broaden its perspective and to kind of match itself to the way that pop culture and music culture was changing in the 2010s as well. And so as a result of that, Pitchfork kind of remained on the cutting edge and remained, I think, a really relevant and useful point of call for figuring out what's interesting in the world of alternative music right now. What are some of the artists we should be paying attention to that we may not be aware of? And of course, what is going on with some of our bigger artists, and also applying a critical and discerning and even artful lens to discussions of major superstars who were often not afforded that level of consideration on an artistic and intellectual level. So I want to shout out some, and again, this is not an exclusive or complete list, but I want to shout out some of the writers who I've enjoyed continuously over the years at Pitchfork. Obviously, longtime editor Ryan Domble, Gillian Mapes, Larry Fitzmaurice, Jean Pally, Jason Green, Mark Hogan, Sam Sodomsky, Mark Richardson, real OG and editor-in-chief for a very long time, someone who's writing on electronic music and alternative music of that sphere in the late 90s, early 2000s, was heavily influential on me and my tastes. Phil Sherburne, Matt Schnipner, Jeremy Larson, Quinn Morland, Lindsay Zalatz, so many great writers that have been a core part of my coming to appreciate the art of music writing and the art of music journalism, and that criticism and discussion of music can be more than just a shallow recounting, can be something that goes above and beyond. And even I would say one of the things that has kept me coming back to Pitchfork in recent years is their amazing Sunday review series, where they pick a classic record or sometimes a kind of undersung record every Sunday, and they get an incredibly talented and specialized writer to write, a massive piece on that album. And there've been so many great Sunday reviews over the years, and that to me has been like where some of the best writing on music has been that I've ever read. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, there was a fantastic piece from Grayson Haver Curran on Brian Eno's Ambient One music for airports that brought tears to my eyes. An incredible piece of writing. So,
Good
yeah,
piece.
I've rambled here, but really all this is just to say, don't take music writers, music journalists, people who love and care and commit themselves to commenting on and critiquing and raising up music. Don't take them for granted, because it's not a given that they'll always be around. It's not a given that they'll always have the resources to be able to do that. We do live in an ecosystem where thankfully there are some places that have managed to survive, sites like The Quietus, for instance, but also Stereo Gum, who I read
Stereo
every
Gum.
week, and who, I think it was a couple of years ago now that Stereo Gum owner Scott Lappertine was able to buy Stereo Gum from Billboard, who he had, I think, sold it to or merged with a few years prior to that, and he was able to buy it back. So that is now like a 100% independently owned website as well. So they presumably have, high costs to meet every week. And I would say if there's one, site that you ever consider supporting, monetarily or just by giving them clicks and turning your ad block off while you're on that website, I would say make it Stereo Gum because, we need to cherish and support and hoist up what we have. Obviously, there are a lot of great writers who you can support independently on sites like Substack and Medium as well. Just do whatever you want to do whatever feels right to you. But just my plea really is to, if you enjoy reading about music, if you value music criticism and music writing, find ways to support the people who you believe do that well or in a way that resonates with you or in a way that you think is important, because even on the individual level of each of us as an individual person, giving support in whatever way we can, that does matter. It does make a difference. So that's all I have to say, basically. I I don't know whether I want to say something as final as RIP Pitchfork, although, it feels, given the scale of the layoffs, like I don't know an exact proportion, but I believe something like, three-quarters of their regular writing staff were made redundant.
I've read more than 50%.
Yeah. So in light of that, it feels difficult to imagine Pitchfork being anything close to what it was, especially if it ceases being a vertical and just becomes, a GQ feature. My God, how dystopic. And it's really sad as well that it's GQ because, Pitchfork have, as I've said, worked really hard over the last decade plus to diversify their voices, to represent, a wider range of cultures from around the world, of sexualities and genders and experiences. So for all of that to be folded into, the world's biggest men's magazine feels a little bit like a punch in the gut. Genuinely, this might feel, if I guess there are a lot of people out there who don't really have any, who've never really had much of any investment in Pitchfork, and I get that. If you haven't had it, you haven't had it. But this genuine, so that's, to those people, this might sound over the top, but this genuinely feels like I'm grieving in a way, the way that I would if I had lost someone, like a person in my life. It feels like a shock that I still haven't adjusted to. It's so strange.
I feel like some people might even be a little bit confused just because we're obviously operating in a new like medium for music discourse and whatnot, because like we've obviously mentioned Pitchfork here and there in the past, and more often than not it was probably to clown on some of their more like notorious, mainly like older stuff. So this may seem like it comes out of nowhere, but like basically if you enjoy any form of music criticism that is in any way like, I guess, like thoughtful or just probes beyond what you can passively observe, then you owe a lot of your appreciation to these voices, to Pitchfork. And then not to say that like those original guys running the website who founded the website were, again, champions of diverse voices and whatnot, but like it was foundational to music listeners, and I feel like a lot of the same ways that somebody like Roger Ebert was foundational to a lot of film people. I know that that was my like middle school experiences, that I would read a website like that, like you probably read Pitchfork, and I became familiar with a lot of the writers that way. And that's one thing that I feel like just needs to be emphasized, is that you have to like just support writers out there that you really really like, that you single out from specific publications. I'd be remiss if we didn't mention a friend of the podcast, Hannah Jocelyn. Go follow her and
Who just had, as the day we
a
record this,
piece
who
out on
just had a
Against
piece
Me's Transgender Dysphoria Blues that is absolutely fantastic and that you should read. Also, I know this
on
podcast
Stereo
is
Gum.
and I feel like a lot of the discourse around this situation was unfortunately swallowed up by the fact that like pitchforks come kind of like mimetic particularly with like, Gen Z people these days for like their notoriously terrible reviews for some very canonized classic albums and stuff. And I saw a lot of sentiments that were like, oh, because Pitchfork did this, I don't care. Or like, and I saw this happen. It's part of a broader trend that like it happened a lot last year with the strikes, is that, when a lot of the people in the business, they went on strike, and you see a lot of anti-art sentiment online of just being like, oh, those actors and stuff, they're all rich. Why are they striking? Why? And it very much bleeds over to the Pitchfork thing of just like, oh, these music writers are all fundamentally untalented and I don't like them. Just to like counter this, most of those reviews that you all hate and think are terrible for those reviews, uh, Tools Lateralis, Nine Inch Nails is The Fragile, all those notorious ones. First of all, most of them were written by Ryan Schreiber and Brent DiCrescenzo. Uh, so those are two guys. They are not a synecdoche for a greater whole here. Those only exist because you heard about them in passing and you thought like, oh, that's a terrible review for an album I like, so this publication's worthless. This publication is responsible for so many people. Like, I mean, you don't have Mike the Snare without Pitchfork. You don't have all of those great music YouTubers that you want. You don't have the Jams and Tea podcast without Pitchfork.
Well, even if Pitchfork was worthless, even if it was as lowest common denominator as many of those Ryan Schreiber and Brent DiCrescenzo reviews were in exclusivity, a media conglomerate buying an independent website in the long run only to shutter it is a net
Bad.
negative, and it's not an indication of the economy or like the way that the world is. It is a reflection of corporate greed and nothing else, which in itself is a reflection of many things. But you can't sit here and go, well, I didn't like what they wrote, so I don't care that they are gone now. Because, this will happen to things that you do care about.
Bad reviews deserve to exist too, no matter how badly written they are, how uninformed they are, how off base they are. They deserve to exist, whether you like it or not.
If
I mean,
only to clown on them. Like,
yeah,
I've gotten so much joy out of clowning on the Nine Inch Nails The Fragile review. It's hilarious.
I mean, comedy gold.
And it's
and
just like
all of those reviews have also helped to continue the conversation around those records and to
Yes.
just continue conversation around music in general. Like, they are conversation starters. Also, I would say this is maybe besides the point as well, but it's also another thing that people often lack the context for. Records reviews like Andrew WK's I Get Wet and the Fragile review. Both of those are albums that Pitchfork would later go on to re-review extremely positively, and in the course of doing so, apologizing for those old reviews. So it's not as though, it's very cherry picky is all I'm saying, the way that people talk about it. And and it's fine because like it's part of the fun. But what I'm saying is you can never do this with Rolling Stone reviews or Spin.
No.
Like, no one's ever going to do that. They don't generate those responses in the same way. They haven't captivated a culture in the same way, and they haven't like provided a window into a truly like artistic and thoughtful way of discussing music, at least not in a very long time. Maybe Rolling Stone was better. Maybe that could be said about Rolling Stone in the 70s, but we would be so much worse off without Pitchfork, animating us
God, yeah.
both in positive and negative ways. And I think it's a sign of a healthy music journalism ecosystem where a site like that could be generating that level of conversation, that level of discussion, that level of energetic response, whether positive or negative. It is for the people who see the great stuff. It inspires them to kind of reach for that level, and for the people who view it solely through a negative lens, it inspires them to carve out their own style and provide something that they feel that side may be lacking. It's an inspirational in either way, in either direction. Let's talk about some music now that that heavy weight is lifted. There's some big songs that have come out from major artists already this year that I thought might be worth mentioning. Ariana Grande's come back, kicking off a new album cycle with the lead single of her new album Eternal Sunshine, as inspired by Charlie Kaufman, with this new song Yes and. What do you guys think of Yes and what are your general feelings on Ariana Grande at this point in her career as well? Because we've talked about her a few times. She's someone who's been big for a while. She's a fairly established name. I have particular thoughts on the song and also on what I think it represents in terms of her artistic personality, certain things that I find interesting or certain things that I respond to and certain things that I kind of find off-putting. But what do you guys think about this?
The song is fine. She is as insufferable to me as she has always been as a presence.
I feel like
Just
there's two kinds of Ariana Grande songs. Maybe this is a bit reductive, but just follow me on this. There's the Ariana Grande songs, which are about being hopelessly in love and just feeling something very, very deeply. And then there's the Ariana Grande songs about girl bossing and kicking it to the haters
That's
and rising above it and being.
this is why Thank You Next is her best album. I really like the Ariana albums that I like. Again, I think Thank You Next is a great pop album. I think Sweetener is a little bit, it's a bit more unkempt, ironically, than that album, but I still think it's good. Dangerous Woman, good album. I
Mhm.
know none of us were fond of her most recent one, but it was because it just sort of, it felt rushed and like it lacked an identity and was just kind of like really weirdly written. And this is like the exact kind of single that just confirms all of my potential like bad suspicions as to where she could go, like when it comes to her direction as like an ethos as an artist. Because like sonically, this is okay. Like there's kind of a housey thing going on here that I think Ariana kind of like fits pretty well into. And it's not exactly something that has been robustly explored in her work previous, and I like that. However, this whole like it it boggles the mind because Thank You Next is an album where she flawlessly spins tragedy and internal controversy that she went through after the Manchester concert, after the passing of Mac Miller, after like a ton of really bad shit. And then she spun it into that album so well, like amazingly. Like it's an interesting sort of introspective effort from one of the, decade's biggest pop stars. And hell, I will defend songs on that album that I know everyone else I know hates. Seven Rings, good song. Break Up with Your Girlfriend, I'm Bored, good song. Then there's this where she's going back to a personality driven thing, and she's got that line that went like semi-viral, like, oh, what is it, what businesses of it is yours, whose dick that I ride? And I'm like, I don't care. I don't care. Why are you assuming that I care? Why are you treating all of your listeners like they are fucking TMZ? Why are you trying to talk at people like they're the press? Like, I get it. You're under undue scrutiny. You're a celebrity. This is going to happen. It's going to feel like things are closing in from all sides. But the average everyday person, beyond thinking, wow, that's a little home wreckery of you to, ruin somebody's marriage, but I don't fucking care. Make me interesting, cool music about yourself and actually make it drama worth mining instead of this petty bullshit. I hate looking at lyrics on pop songs and feeling like I'm reading a fucking variety headline. Like, stop it.
I don't have the level of animosity that you have in response to the song, although I'm very entertained by it. I will say, though, I broadly agree in the sense that, and this is the thing, I think the kind of song that Ariana's trying to do here, it can be a really great song. Like it's a storied tradition in pop
I
music,
agree.
responding to, critical and media scrutiny and people talking about your personal life and, doing all these really invasive and ugly things because they see you as a property that can be, treated in any way that they see fit. And I think that there's a history of pop songs, there's a history of artists who've responded to that and who've kind of, really, with either class or just with power and dynamics, really kind of clamped back against that and made great music. It's just that Ariana isn't good at that. That's not something that I have ever really felt that she's very strong at. Moments on her more recent albums where she has, yeah, had that attitude to me have always felt very cheap, especially when you consider songs that are kind of adjacent to this in the sense that they're songs that are responding to, difficulties she's experienced in her life, but and also songs that are expressing a kind of similar message this song is expressing, which is, that sometimes you have to be fucking strong and you have to say fuck this and you have to kind of pick yourself up. I'm thinking, of course,
Thank You
of
Next is one of her best songs, and that's literally what it's about in its
I
entirety.
I'm thinking specifically of No Tears Left to Cry, which I think is, one of her three or four best songs. And it's kind of about that in a
Up there
really
with Breathing.
genuinely, effective and powerful way. So, yeah, I think that, and I don't want to say that Ariana's less good at it now because she's less motivated by tragedy, because that would be a really,
No.
it would be a really unfair thing to say. But it does feel as a little bit as though, like with positions, Ariana's kind of has very little to offer. And it feels just a little bit like posturing about her life and how things just bounce off her in a way that doesn't feel like I can kind of get on board with that, or I can like resonate with that, or I can like, find that aspirational. It just feels a little bit like, okay, let's move on. Speaking of major successful pop artists, Lil Nas X came back this month with J Christ, a song which underperformed for him commercially. And this is kind of a
Jesus.
shame, I think, because while I don't think this song is really any better or worse than the Ariana Grande song, I guess, I'm kind of willing Lil Nas X to succeed, because he makes so many people mad. He makes
Yes.
so many annoying, irritating people mad. And what's really funny about it is that his provocations are so shallow. Like he doesn't really do
Yes.
anything blasphemous. He doesn't like really, especially with this. Like maybe with the "Call Me by Your Name" song where he was, pole dancing for Satan, you could get it a little bit. But this is just like such weak source provocation. And yet he still like seems to be animating conservatives, with his with
He's
his
getting like fucking influencers angry, just being like it's the same people that are just like Beyonce's in the Illuminati, or just like Jay-Z's a Satanist. It's just like, oh, Lil Nas X is pursuing his mission to dethrone God and blaspheme and destroy black masculinity. Ugh! And it's just like, I frankly complete agree with that. The song is, it doesn't do a lot for me. I like the idea of Lil Nas X a little bit more than I like the actual music, even though like I kind of like think Old Town Road does actually kind of slap. Montero is like a fine song, I think. But the song of his that I really like, unfortunately, I really like Industry Baby. It's just really catchy, frankly. Like
yeah.
it's just a really fun song. And Jack Harlow's really good on that song. He's really charming. That is the best implementation of Jack Harlow that we have gotten in this decade so far. So like this is, even for Lil Nas X, I think this is kind of in the middle. Like I think he's good at writing hooks. I'll give him that much. Everything else is a bit white noisy to me, but like he's going by, like, you can tell that Lil Nas X started out as a Nicki Minaj stan, because he's doing exactly what Nicki Minaj did in the early 2010s, which is just piss everyone off. Like she knew exactly like what mines to step on musically when she did that. Like Lil Nas X is like when Nicki Minaj made Stupid Ho and pissed off the entire world, and everyone's just like, oh, this is the worst song ever, like blah 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 blah. Meanwhile, I listen to Stupid Ho and I'm just kind of like, I don't know, this song's just funny. Like this is just like a silly, almost hyper pop adjacent like hip hop song about Nicki Minaj being fucking annoying and pissing people off. Like she should. It's the same reason why I don't hate songs like Anaconda. Like they're so outlandish. Like how could I? Like it's just I don't know. I like the provocateur spirit when it's being done with like this sort of Lil Nas X just has a charisma and a levity that like lets you know that he's in on the joke, but simultaneously is 100% committed to what he's doing. And that I admire no matter how the music turns out.
Yeah, there's just something about him as a successful pop culture figure that is refreshing. What I will say
Yeah.
is, I say this while basically agreeing with everything you said. I agreed Industry Baby is the best song, big single that he's had. Um, I don't think he's very talented, which seems mean to say. I think, well, actually, no, let me rephrase that. I don't think he's very musically talented. I think he's incredibly savvy. I think he's great. He knows
Yeah.
how to use the internet. He knows how to work himself. He knows how to get people worked up. He knows how to do a lot of very savvy things that have put him where he is. But I find his songs, broadly speaking, to be quite bland. It
Hmm.
was somewhat bemusing to throw this on and be like, okay, here is like the 17 millionth time in the last 7 years that someone has done a really cheap riff on the humble piano beat. And this one's like particularly egregious in how close it is to that, which is fine, but
Yeah.
it's just like, okay. And I think he is, generally speaking, pretty good at hooks. I don't find I find this song to be a little bit disappointing in that regard. I think one of his biggest skills is his sense for like his music videos, I think are in large part where he really shines the most. He's
Yeah.
great at music at either coming up with these music video concepts or surrounding himself with people
And
who
like
have these ideas.
choreography, he's obviously like a very talented dancer.
Yeah, he's a great performer. His videos have fantastic concepts. Those are the things I think that most people remember that are the most enduring. I think that will be probably the most enduring thing about this song as well, is just some of the imagery in that video. Um, so yeah, I admire him. I don't really want to say bad things about him, but I do find him to be, as a musician, quite bland, even if I think that he's very skilled at a lot of things that are peripheral to the music and maybe skilled enough to balance the difference, I suppose.
He needs
I,
a good like hands-on producer. I feel
yeah,
like the right producer with a little bit of more of like creative management than some producers are often given would probably result in the best possible version of Lil Nas X, should that ever happen.
yeah. I'll always be keenly following him in his career, and I hope that he continues to have success as well. Because it does feel like satisfying. Although I also kind of hope maybe more than that, that the scale of his success is a sort of, glass ceiling shattering that will allow other artists, other
Hmm.
queer hip hop artists, other queer pop rap artists to be able to break it through and have his level of success as well. Because I think that there are unquestionably, I'm sure, a lot of artists who fit into Lil Nas X's demographic, who are queer and making pop rap, who just need the level of success that he has to really kind of break through. And I think that if slash when that happens, we'll realize how little of a need we have for Lil Nas X in particular, and really just how itching we've been for someone to fill this kind of vacuum, just to step into this place in culture and create a space for queer people in pop rap specifically.
Hmm.
So flowers we're due, but I really am still waiting for what Lil Nas X represents to bleed into culture a little bit more. And I feel like we haven't quite gotten there yet, which is, hopefully we will. Let's move on to one of the most unexpected surprises of the month so far, which is that former Sonic Youth co-front person Kim Gordon is teasing her second solo album, which I believe is coming out either next month or the month after. It's coming out soon anyway. And the lead off single is called Bye Bye. And it is something I can only describe as a stormy, dark, brooding trap banger. It's a really strange
Yeah.
song. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, holy shit. In a weird sense, it reminded me a little bit more of like someone like, I don't know, Patti Smith or something. Just this idea of like
Ooh.
the stolid kind of spoken word female performer who's kind of speaking these very kind of elliptical, poetic, disjointed, fragmented lyrics over this kind of really overwhelming soundscape. It's a very kind of abstract comparison because obviously Patti Smith never made anything that sounds even remotely like this, but it was just like I can understand finding this just to be utterly bizarre and completely, having no point of entry to it. But I just found it to be so unique and so surprising, and I was just kind of really taken with it. I found it to be really, really interesting, and it makes me really want to check out. I look forward to this upcoming album from her, and I hope that she kind of continues in this direction as well. I hope that because I like the idea. I see, honestly, the more I think about it, I see analogs between this particularly sparse and kind of oppressive trap sound and some of the noisier, more avant-garde stuff that Sonic Youth were doing in the 80s. I can see a spiritual analog between this and some of the kind of early Sonic Youth music in terms of in spirit basically. So yeah, I think that it's worth checking out, see where you fall on it, give it a chance. What did you guys think of Kim Gordon's Bye Bye?
It actually
Uh,
really reminded me of Sonic Youth have this EP that's a collab with another sort of New York, uh, that sort of weird no wave hardcore scene that they were born out of, Lydia Lunch. They have a
Mm.
collab EP with her, and it sounds a lot like that, like the vocals there especially. But I'm just interested in this album as a prospect because whether or not this is going to be like a one-off sound or what the rest of the album is going to sound like, or if it's all going to sound exactly like this. I just want to hear a Kim Gordon song called Psychedelic Orgasm because, frankly, that just sounds dope as shit.
the sound of it is really interesting. And I'm intrigued to see if that like this is going to be the kind of album that is like interested in keenly developing this one sort of soundscape or things along this line, or the kind of album that's just like, this is the one song that's like this, and now we're gonna do whatever in the hell.
That Low album that we reviewed that I wasn't
Yeah.
here for. Hey,
Hey,
what?
what?
That's
I
what it
was.
made
Hey,
me think of.
what?
What?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's it.
I thought of that as well.
it's it's like lyrically, it's a little like, and in terms of the delivery, especially, it's a little like, in the future we only drink Diet Coke for me.
Diet Coke, Diet Coke.
Which that's a flavor. But it'll be interesting to unpack this thing eventually, I'm sure.
Mm. I need to take a step back and listen to her last album, No Home record, because that's got some like, from what I can gather, it's apparently quite a heavy industrial record. So it might be that this is not all that surprising of a pivot for Kim, but I would not be surprised if this does prove to be fairly representative of what she's going for, given that it's the first song on the new album, and that this sort of oppressiveness is not something that's foreign to her at all. One of the things that kind of makes her so attractive is just how uncaring and kind of brutish she can be. So yeah, really, really definitely interested
The real
in following
question
this.
is going to be as to whether or not Kim Gordon or Thurston Moore has the better solo album this year.
Oh, they've both got ones coming out. Okay, that's interesting.
I just want
Similarly,
to say that I earlier, a couple minutes ago, I went to type in Kim Gordon to rate your music because I didn't know how many solo albums she had, and I accidentally typed in Jim Gordon. Fucking Gary Oldman popping up on Rate Your Music.
um,
Stupid.
yeah. Let's move into some albums now. Jake, I know you've been listening to some of the more high-profile releases that have hit out this month. What do you
Mhm.
have to say?
First one I'll talk about is the newest album from somebody we reviewed last year, and that being Kali Uchis, her new album ORQUÍDEAS. Last year, Kali Uchis had her album Red Moon and Venus, which Riley and I reviewed, I think the same week we reviewed the newest Slow Tie album.
Yeah, that's right.
And we both enjoyed Red Moon and Venus. I admittedly haven't gotten to her debut Isolation yet because I know that's like the big album of hers that people really like a lot, and I've been meaning to listen to it. and we both enjoyed Red Moon and Venus. I think we found it a little bit like maybe it undeveloped some of its more like thematic ideas, and like, not all of the features were great. It wasn't exactly the most consistent thing in the world, but overall it was like a really solid, very pleasant, very well produced and well performed R&B sort of neo soul album. So I didn't even know she was coming out with a new record. I just got a notification for it, and I listened to it, and I was pleasantly quite surprised, because I think this album is even better. Not even like, not hugely, not substantially better than the last album, but I think it is a subtle improvement in basically every way, particularly the front half of this, which I think is just phenomenal, particularly from a production standpoint. She's going for a little bit more of, I think, a little bit more of an atmospheric bent on this one. I know a lot of people have talked about some of the like synth work and stuff being a little bit nondescript. Frankly, I didn't have that problem with this at all. I think the arrangements are particularly lush. I think everything sounds terrific. And as a performer, I think she's about as strong as she's ever been, or at least as strong as I've heard her. I do think that the back half is a little bit weaker. This album kind of backloads all of its features, and unfortunately, I don't really like any of them, frankly. Kali is such a great commanding central presence on this record that whenever time is taken away from her, it feels like a disservice to the record. And there are particularly one or two features on here on the more reggaeton-inspired cuts that just don't really gel with the song very well for me. But that said, she does explore sounds that are more adjacent to things like reggaeton, which were really on that last album. And a lot of these experiments work out really, really well, particularly some of the like dancier cuts on here, like Te Mata is one of the best songs she's ever put out. I think it's terrific. The closer, Dame Beso Muerte, is absolutely gorgeous. Like there's a real great percussive thrum that some of these have that are just positively infectious. Again, it is a bit off balance on the whole, but I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed its atmosphere, and it's kind of incentivized me to go back and potentially listen to her first two albums, which are apparently also very good. But yeah, this is an improvement on all fronts for me. Not quite a front to back great album, but has enough great moments that'll have me coming back to it.
Yeah, I was really taken with this. I think I maybe even enjoyed it a little bit more than you, or at the very least, I feel like I can the gulf between this and the last album is a little bit wider for me. I think that the record really benefits from that added rhythmic focus, especially that more Latin pop side. Because like thing with Red Moon and Venus is that was more of a kind of soul-y, kind of wistful and kind of romantic album. It has a lot of love songs, a lot of kind of ethereal vibes going on with that record that I really, really enjoyed. I haven't listened to Red Moon and Venus since we reviewed it, but I can still on command get the I wish you roses hook stuck in my head. So that's a sign of a great song. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed the renewed pulse of this record. The additional focus on things like reggaeton as well really came through. I was pleasantly surprised by how taken I was with this one. I think I'll definitely be coming back to it. It really kind of just gave me a little bit more animation while I was at work yesterday, trying to get through the day. And so I think really coming in stealthily with a nice peppy start to the year with that album. So I definitely recommend it as well.
And on the completely opposite side of things, I listened to the new album from the Cudster, Kid Cudi, his new album, Insano.
In the Braino.
With the fucking lightning bolt ass album cover. Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna mince words here. This is not good. My first instinct is, of course, to say, why is it so long? But here's the thing with Kid Cudi is that I just kind of instinctively know going into an album of his, regardless of whether or not I enjoy it, and I do enjoy Kid Cudi's first two albums. We talked about him a little bit last year. Go watch those videos if you want more in-depth opinions. But on here, it's basically Kid Cudi falling victim to every single pitfall he as an artist has fallen into, except the interesting ones. Like Speeding Bullet to Heaven, for its many, many faults. One of the worst albums I've ever listened to all the way through. you cannot say that that album is devoid of an interesting slant conceptually, that it's not
You
doing something different. Um,
you do not, in
and
fact,
that's
gotta hand it to him.
when it's Kid Cudi in this instance, I do have to hand it to him because everything that he's made after Speed and Bullet to Heaven has technically been better. And
It's
I have
technically been
probably
music.
it's technically been music, and I have also enjoyed it far less just because it is more languorous, more long-winded, more empty space. And it's just like again, we had a running joke that we forgot we reviewed his most recent album before this, Man on the Moon 3, because when we did the quiz last year, I was like, what if there was Man on the Moon 2 was so good? Why isn't there a Man on the Moon 3?
Kid
And then
Cudi,
Riley reminded me, Jake, we reviewed Man on the Moon 3.
Kid Cudi is
And
one of the rare artists who the more conceptual and thoughtful and ambitious he gets, the less interesting he becomes somehow. Like he when he
I
tries to like
I don't
structure his albums into these kind of swelling multi-act parts, and taking you on a sonic journey that's evoking these visual like stimulations and shit, and it's just vacant, it's so vapid, there's so much of nothing going on. It's amazing how hard Kid Cudi tries in comparison with how utterly devoid of interesting conceptual ideas or thoughts the end result of that turns out to be. It's so baffling to the point where it feels like something is wrong with me. I feel like I should be getting something that I'm not getting with Kid Cudi.
And let me tell you, if you listen to Insano, that feeling is not going to depart you anytime soon. In fact, it's almost impressive how, while listening to it, I was just like, man, Kitty, good job. Kid Cudi is such a
We
one
should just
note.
call him Kitty from now on.
I will not do that. Kid Cudi is such an insufferably bland presence in his own music these days that I looked at the feature list for this, right? And I was like, okay, well, at least he's throwing in a bunch of really high profile features to kind of spice things up a bit in this really long album because he's doing exactly what he's been doing, the long, sort of codeine infused dragging out of his vowel sounds and syllables, singing and doing the thing that
Putting
he
on
always
song
does.
titles like Funky Wizard Smoke and Electro Wave Baby.
The funny thing about this is that yes, he is as boring as he's always been, but whenever there is a feature, without fail, no matter who it is, they come in and I'm like, oh God, I'm saved. And they instantly make the song worse. Every feature on this album sucks. Like, if you want to listen to this album out of sheer curiosity, do it purely to witness how some of the most talented people in hip hop that Cudi has recruited for this album managed to come on here and have like a negative amount of presence. It's like they suck the energy out of the song. ASAP Rocky on Wow. What is he doing? Listen to
Wow.
this and marvel at the fact that one of the most in-demand featured rappers is coming in on here and sounds somehow more asleep than Kid Cudi does. I completely forgot that DJ Drama, who you might most recently know for the fact that he's heavily featured on Tyler the Creator's Call Me If You Get Lost, is on the opening track. I completely fucking forgot about this. But also Lil Yachty is on here on Too Damn High, and frankly, I did
Too
not
damn
even
high.
notice it was him because it sounds exactly like Cudi. It's produced exactly like Cudi. I just thought that he was taking some vocal modulation on, and I didn't even notice it was him. Fucking Travis Scott is on here twice and manages to make each song worse in different ways. He also features on one song with Pharrell in debatably the worst sounding song. How do you have the worst sounding song on your album be the one that Pharrell Williams is on? Lil Wayne shows up on here later in the track list. And I mean, like, has this man sounded awake on a feature that isn't Tyler the Creator in the last 10 years? Because frankly, I have never been a huge fan of his by any measure, but like I know he can do better than this. I've listen to him do better than this, and yet he consistently phones it in. Young Thug, I don't remember a single goddamn thing about this feature. I mean, probably would have forgotten about it entirely if I wasn't looking at it directly in front of my face on here. There's a string of songs on here that, hand to God, I don't think this album is bad enough to quite be worst album of the year material. It might edge in at like the very, like, depending on how bad this year could get, it totally could. But like, there are songs on here that are enjoyable for what Cudi is doing. I think the penultimate track, Blue Sky, is probably the best thing on here by merit of the fact that it just kind of, it relatively pushes all of the monotonous gook away and gives you something real and honest. And Cudi's lyricism is actually decent on here, and he's actually kind of legible for once. But the most notable part of this album is in contention for the worst run of music that Kid Cudi's ever made. And I don't say that lightly because he's got some bad streaks of music, but holy fuck. Mr. Kula, Freshie, Tortured, and X and Cud, the year is going to have to work hard to beat for in terms of a nadir, in terms of like 4-track long runs of music where just nothing good happens on here. And why is the music industry hell-bent on dragging the corpse of XXXTentacion into another goddamn decade? This guy's never been interesting. You could have told me that he is 90 different fucking people on whatever fucking scrap of vault track this feature came from, I'm sure, that his label are prostituting around because they just, they can't let sleeping dogs lie with this fucking dead kid. I swear to God, he comes on to this song and it's just the most inane shit in the world. Like, if he wasn't an actual, like, woman-beating monster, I would say that it's disrespectful of his legacy to put on this album. But lo and behold, nobody gives a shit about that kind of stuff anymore. But it's exhausting. It's quite terrible. It's quite consistently terrible, but it's not terrible in an interesting or exciting way, even remotely. Let me attempt to save my sanity here by pivoting to an unquestionable highlight where it kind of feels like the Parannoul album last year, where an instant album of the year contender comes out of the blue and will probably stand completely unrivaled, at least for a little while, considering how many good releases we've got down the pipeline. But I listened to the new album from a band I've been banging on about for a while now, Hoplites. I mentioned them several times, well, him several times last year because very prolific artist. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Hoplites is another band in this sort of new wave of extreme music that's kind of been bubbling under the surface underground and sort of that very online metal groups that I follow, where it's blending black metal, tech death, tech thrash, avant-garde, dissonant black metal, mathcore, basically all of the most unfriendly styles of music imaginable and synthesizing it together. Dropped 3 albums last year, all of which I included on my most underrated album of the year video, just because they're all quality, particularly the second release in this string of records, which is in all Greek but translates to Eaten Alive. I think is the most brutal metal album released this decade so far, an absolute like pinnacle in terms of just insanely aggro music. And at the very beginning of 2024, he has dropped a new album out of the blue, no teased singles, no nothing. Dude is happy wallowing in the relative obscurity that he is in. This new album's title translates to Perpetuated in Greek. And this is interesting because this is a very different pivot. The 3 albums that he released last year are all very stylistically quite, just kind of mix and match some different influences to create a very diverse crop of records. And this is no exception because this takes the mixture of avant-garde black metal, mathcore, tech thrash, dissonant death metal, and combines it with things like progressive metal, brutal prog, and like Zool and occasionally like jazzier stuff. And this is exceptional. I think it may even be the best project that he's put out so far. Very narrowly, just because I do think Eaten Alive is a masterpiece. But I think this might edge out because, well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, this is 6 tracks long. It's so tight. Like, oh my God, each one of these pieces so incredibly distinct. And for as unpleasant as this music is, it's also weirdly kind of fun. Like, you can feel a sort of more traditional thrash and heavy metal influence that isn't unlike, I don't know, the speedier parts of like Judas Priest albums and stuff, particularly on tracks the penultimate one, where there's just these galloping rhythm sections that are just so much fucking fun, so invigorating, something that I never would have predicted an artist like this that would sort of dabble in. Like, there's like saxophone, which is an element of his music that has not been present at all so far, which is all over here. It's on the first track, it's played and it's super like squiggly and free form, and it kind of cuts through the song in a way that's almost like nauseating. It's really like ugly sounding, but it's also like it's a bit repetitive, but all this does is serve to structurally emphasize whenever this album goes off on a bit of a tangent or sort of begins to actually build its progressions, which manage to feel all the more dynamic when they do actually change things up. And it just sort of plays these sections over and over again, kind of beating you with these atonal riffs and just sort of digging itself further into the ground in like a given section. And then a new set of riffs will pop up, and like it'll just sort of loop into this kind of structure where it keeps throwing you for a loop over and over and over again, and it keeps things fresh, it keeps things exciting. It's so fucking brutal. He's also kind of created his most accessible album to date. This project is just one fucking guy, one dude who lives in Zhejiang, China, and goes by, colloquially, you can call him JL or Lu Zhenyang. He is this incredibly prolific dude who also has an atmospheric black metal side project that I knew nothing about, that he also released a new album in last year. So this dude he keeps at it over and over again. And in fact, this album is being met with such acclaim because it's being released at the start of the year with basically no competition. People have like private messaged him on social media platforms like Instagram and have been like, hey, you're #1 on the Rate Your Music charts. And he is such a recluse that he responds back with either the burger emoji or saying, please take it off, which I just think is fucking hysterical and totally indicative of the space that this guy creates music from and how like insular he is. But I found out an interesting reason as to why all of like his band name and all of his songs and album names are in Greek. And it's not just because in the sort of avant-garde black metal scene, this is just sort of a popular thing to do, very kind of Death Spell Omega adjacent. But actually, the reason that he does this is political, because the censorship laws in places like China are not great, especially for independent musicians. So the way that he bypasses a lot of filters and a lot of censorship is by putting it in a language that effectively nobody actively speaks. So he can talk about a lot of the social unrest that's happening in places like his country, which, if you're at all familiar with the fact, people like him got a lot of shit to be upset about. So he basically stealthily sneaks it through into this online medium, which I think is just incredibly fucking smart. And he's effectively learned an entirely new language just to communicate these things, which shows you the level of dedication that he's applying his skill with. And I have to mention the 5th track on here, which is probably the best song I've heard so far this year, which is just this bizarre, like immediate, insanely brutal, and alarmingly simple piece of music. It's this really intense and tightly composed thing, and the riffs just kind of growl and purr, and then it blossoms into this nerve-shredding, vein flaying final third of the song where the guitar and what I can only assume is a modulated keyboard harmonize together for a set of rhythms that like syncopate into what sounds like a lightning bolt being shot directly into your fucking eardrums. This as a tension release for the whole album is just, it's fucking orgasmic. The setup and payoff on this album is just absurd. Whereas the great album that he released last year is more just about suffocating, overwhelming, heavy power that just leaves no room for dynamism because of how much it just wants to crush you single-mindedly. This, on the other hand, is just there's way more happening. It's so much more dynamic. This song reminds me of something that the Japanese metal band Psy would end up doing, that they actually did on one of their more recent records that I really enjoyed. The only thing here I think that holds this album back is that the final track it's a bit of a head scratcher. Like Man here is clearly influenced by other avant-garde black metal acts, like, again, I've mentioned Theophonos of the Serpent Column, Death Spell Omega, and these guys, they often kind of go out of their way to throw you for a loop with their final tracks with something unconventional and disarming, like they'll throw like maybe a pure noise thing or a black ant thing out there. But like we get this weird fade from the saxophone at the start of this and some like very plaintively picked acoustic sections that feel really creepy and lonely in comparison to the stark maximalism of the rest of the record. It's like rustic and earthy and strange. It feels almost chamber folky, but it then like evolves into something more like subtly dissonant because it starts playing these weird chords at the same time as other ones, and it sounds almost like a nursery rhyme, like almost like Mary Had a Little Lamb. Like the melody is kind of in there. And then it leads to like a more complex section in the final leg where the song kind of roars back to life to kind of steamroll you. I mean, I can only speculate that this song is so structurally unsatisfying that like maybe it serves more of a thematic purpose, which I'll admit I'm still translating the lyrics and I want to do a deep dive into all of his music because what I have discovered has been very interesting. It's been on a subject I don't know a whole lot about, that being the socio-political climate of China. But I'm eager to see if this is like justified within the text of the album. There's like the ending is actually really striking just because it ends with this like really ragged breathing right at this huge explosive moment that just feels like it's showing you that he's like completely run himself ragged in terms of performance. And it's like this, he lets out this like ghoulish growl here, and it almost feels like this whole song is supposed to be like a cruel joke of like making you think that the album is ending after enduring so much punishment, and then it only roars back to life again as part of that cruel joke. But it's the only piece of music on here that isn't absurdly confident. I genuinely think every other song on here is like a 10 out of 10. If you like big, ugly, dissonant metal, I am like, it's hard for me to imagine doing better than this. This is an amazing fucking album, and I have been coming back to this giddily like every single day. It's a testament to its quality that I'm willing to endure its punishment over and over and over again.
Alrighty, so that's our catch up on some of the more recent things that have come out in music this year. Let us know what you've been listening to so far. What have been the best records and songs of the month so far, in your opinion as well? What do we need to be checking out? Hit us up with that in the comments below, and we'll be back again very soon to talk about our most anticipated albums and video games of 2024. Until next time, though, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, American Express. Don't leave home without it.